The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet neighborhood in North Carolina when Sergeant Daniel Reyes turned the key in the front door of his house for the first time in over a year. His boots, still dusty from the long journey home, stepped onto the familiar porch that once echoed with the sound of barking and wagging tails. But now there was only silence. A silence so heavy, it wrapped around his chest tighter than any uniform ever had. Daniel had just returned from his final deployment overseas. After 12 years in the military, countless missions, and moments that had tested every fiber of his being, he was finally home, for good. All he could think about during those long months away was this house, this town. And Max, his loyal golden retriever, had been his best friend since the day he rescued him as a pup from a storm drain 6 years ago. Through every deployment, every moment of loss, Max had been there, waiting faithfully. That dog wasn't just a pet. He was family. So when Daniel opened the door expecting to be greeted by an excited bark, the slap of paws against the hardwood floor, and maybe a few slobbery kisses, what he got instead was a stillness that made his stomach twist. "Max!" he called out softly. No answer. Just the faint creak of the house settling around him. He dropped his duffel bag by the door and began walking through the house. Everything looked just the way he left it. Photos still on the mantel, the faint smell of his old cologne lingering in the air. But Max was nowhere to be found. That's when he noticed the back door slightly ajar. His pulse quickened as he stepped outside into the overgrown backyard. The grass had grown wild, weeds curling up along the sides of the fence. The old doghouse sat tilted near the corner, its paint peeling. And then he saw it, movement. First he thought it was just a shadow. But then the shape shifted, slowly, cautiously. Or what was left of him. Daniel's heart stopped. There, barely able to lift his head, lay the once vibrant and strong dog he remembered. Max's fur was matted and dirty, patches missing from his sides. His ribs were visible, each one rising and falling with labored breaths. His eyes, those warm amber eyes, still held recognition, still tried to wag his tail at the sight of Daniel. But it was weak, so weak. "Max! Oh my God!" Daniel whispered, dropping to his knees. Tears rushed to his eyes as he gently placed a hand on Max's frail body. The dog let out a soft whimper, his tongue flicking out just barely as if to say, "You came back." Daniel couldn't understand. He had arranged everything before he left. A neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, had promised to check on Max, feed him, keep him company. She even sent photos the first few weeks. What happened? How had it come to this? Anger, guilt, confusion. It all came crashing down at once. He picked Max up as gently as he could and rushed him inside, wrapping him in a blanket. His hands trembled as he dialed the nearest emergency vet clinic, his voice shaking as he begged them to be ready. He didn't care how far it was. He just needed to get Max help. Driving with one hand on the wheel and the other keeping Max close, Daniel whispered softly over and over, "Hang in there, buddy. I'm here now. I'm not leaving you again." At the vet, the news wasn't good. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, infection in his paws. Max was holding on by a thread. But there was hope, faint but still there. Daniel never left his side. While other people passed through the clinic, some crying, others relieved, he sat in the corner, cradling Max's head in his lap. He thought about every moment they had shared. Late-night runs, morning walks before drills, that one time Max jumped into a lake just to save a floating stick. And now here he was, fighting for his life because someone had failed him. Because Daniel hadn't been here. But this wasn't how it was going to end. Not like this. Over the next few days, Daniel poured everything he had into helping Max recover. Sleepless nights, constant care, hand feeding him water from a dropper, whispering words of encouragement as if his voice could carry Max back from the edge. And slowly, inch by inch, Max began to respond. It wasn't easy. Every small improvement came with setbacks. Some days Daniel questioned if it was enough. But one morning after 5 long days, Max finally stood up. Humbly, shaky, But standing, Daniel cried like he hadn't cried in years. It was the beginning of something much bigger than just a recovery. Word started spreading, first among neighbors, then across social media. A local vet technician had shared Max's story online, along with a picture of Daniel sleeping in the waiting room, Max curled up beside him. The post went viral. "Soldier comes home to starving dog, refuses to give up," the headline read. Thousands of people began following Max's journey, sending in messages, supplies, even money for his care. But Daniel didn't do it for attention. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just wanted to make things right. Because that's what Max would have done for him. Loyalty goes both ways. As Max began to walk again, play again, even wag his tail with that old sparkle returning to his eyes, something else began to grow too. A message. A quiet but powerful reminder of resilience, of second chances, and of what it truly means to be there for someone when they need you the most. But just as everything seemed to be healing, something unexpected happened. One night, as Daniel was sitting on the porch with Max asleep at his feet, a letter arrived. No name, no return address. Just a plain envelope slipped under the front door. Inside was a single sentence, typed in bold. "You think this is over, but Max wasn't left alone by accident." Daniel stared at the words, his hand frozen. His mind raced. What did it mean? Who had sent it? What really happened during those months he was gone? And more importantly, who had let Max suffer? The real story was just beginning. Daniel read the sentence again, hoping he had misunderstood it. But the words were clear, sharp like a whisper in the dark. "You think this is over, but Max wasn't left alone by accident." He stood there for a long moment, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. The porch light flickered overhead, and Max shifted in his sleep, unaware of the storm beginning to stir again. Daniel's mind raced, pulling at every memory, every face from the last year. Could this be a sick prank? Some random troll online? But no one outside his circle even knew the full details of Max's condition. The post that went viral only scratched the surface. This felt personal. Daniel went back inside, locking the door behind him. He sat at the kitchen table, the letter still clutched in his hand, his other resting protectively on Max's old collar that he'd kept on the counter since they returned from the vet. He took a deep breath and tried to think rationally. Someone knew something. Someone had been watching, or worse, had been close enough to do this to Max and not say a word. His first thought went to Mrs. Whitaker, the sweet older woman who'd promised to look after Max while he was gone. She'd seemed trustworthy, always smiling, always offering a helping hand. But the last few messages she sent before going quiet were short, vague. Then one day they just stopped. Daniel had been worried but chalked it up to bad Wi-Fi or maybe something simple like her phone breaking. But now he wasn't so sure. The next morning, Daniel headed down the street to her house. Max was still too weak to walk far, so he left him curled in a blanket near the window where he could see the yard. As Daniel approached the house, he noticed the curtains were drawn tight, the porch dusty like no one had swept it in weeks. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again, louder. "Mrs. Whitaker," he called out. "It's Daniel. Just wanted to check on you." Still nothing. He stepped back and looked around. Her car was gone. The mailbox was overflowing. Didn't feel right. She wouldn't just leave. Not without saying something. Not with Max depending on her. Daniel left a note and walked home with a knot in his chest. The neighborhood felt different now. The quiet seemed heavier, the friendly waves from neighbors a little slower, a little less sure. Like everyone knew something but no one was saying it. That night, as he sat in the living room with Max nestled beside him, Daniel opened an old photo album. He hadn't looked at it in years. Inside were pictures of his life before the military. His parents both gone now. His younger sister Mia, who'd moved across the country. And Max, from the first day he brought him home, eyes full of mischief and trust. Then, tucked between two pages, he found something he hadn't remembered placing there. A note in his own handwriting, written just before his last deployment. "If anything happens, call Carter. He knows what to do. Carter. It hit him like a cold wind. Sergeant Marcus Carter had served with Daniel years ago. They weren't just teammates, they were close. Carter had left the military before Daniel, moved back to civilian life, and they'd fallen out of touch. But Daniel remembered now. He'd left Max's emergency file with him, just in case. Daniel picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Carter's number was still there, though he hadn't dialed it in over 2 years. He hit call. Rang once. Then a click. Daniel! A deep voice answered. Daniel froze for a second. Yeah, it's me. There was a pause on the other end. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. You know what happened to Max? Daniel asked, getting straight to the point. Carter sighed. I know more than I'm supposed to, but I can't talk about it over the phone. Come find me. Where? There was another pause. Then, same place we trained. Behind the old barn. Midnight. The call ended. Daniel sat back, heart pounding. What could Carter possibly know? What was he talking about? Later that night, with Max resting peacefully, Daniel grabbed his jacket and quietly slipped out. The old barn was on the outskirts of town, abandoned now but once used as a training ground during Carter's off-the-grid workshops. The place held a strange comfort to it, familiar and eerie at the same time. When Daniel arrived, Carter was already there, leaning against a rusted barrel, arms crossed. He looked older, more worn down than Daniel remembered. But his eyes were sharp. You said Max wasn't left alone by accident, Daniel started. What did you mean? Carter motioned for him to sit. You're not gonna like what I'm about to say. But you need to hear it. I'm listening. Carter leaned in, his voice low. Do you remember the ops we did back in 2018? The special assignments, covert, off the books. Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, some of those were strange. We never got full debriefs. Exactly. One of those assignments wasn't what we thought it was. It wasn't just reconnaissance. It was surveillance. You were assigned unknowingly to watch someone connected to a private defense contractor. Daniel frowned. What does this have to do with Max? Carter looked him dead in the eye. You were never supposed to come back from that last tour, Daniel. They had people watching your house, your routines. And Max. He was a link. Test. They wanted to see if you'd left anything behind. Any evidence. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. You're saying someone intentionally let Max starve? Just to see if I'd come back for him? I'm saying it wasn't just neglect, Carter said. It was a message. And that letter you got. That means they know you're asking questions. Daniel stood up, fists clenched. Who are they? Carter shook his head. I can't tell you everything. But I can tell you this, watch your back. And don't trust anyone who suddenly wants to help. As Daniel drove home, his thoughts swirled like a storm. Everything he thought he understood was cracking open. Someone had watched his house. Someone had allowed Max to suffer. And now they were warning him to stop digging. When he pulled into his driveway, the porch light was still on. Max was awake, sitting up in the window, tail thumping weakly when he saw Daniel. Daniel opened the door, knelt beside him and whispered, I promise, buddy. I won't let them hurt you again. But as he turned out the light and headed toward bed, he didn't notice the second letter, slipped under the door sometime after he left, now resting on the floor. And this one simply read, Next time we won't just hurt the dog. Daniel stared at the second letter in his hand, the weight of its message sinking deep into his bones. The threat was no longer just about Max, it was about him, his home, his life. Someone wanted him scared. Someone wanted him to stop. But Daniel had never been the kind of man to run, not in combat and not now. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The neighborhood that once felt safe now seemed different, like there were eyes behind every curtain. Cars he didn't recognize were parked just a little too long. A man in a gray hoodie had walked past his house 3 times in one afternoon. And at night, when the world grew quiet, Daniel could hear the hum of something, Maybe a drone, or maybe just his nerves stretching thin. He started checking the locks twice before bed, then 3 times. He kept a flashlight and an old service pistol by the nightstand, not because he wanted to use it, but because something inside him whispered that he might have to. Meanwhile, Max was getting better slowly. He had started to eat more, sleep deeper, and even wag his tail when Daniel spoke to him. But the spark in his eyes hadn't fully returned. Sometimes he would sit at the back door and stare outside for long stretches, as if remembering something he couldn't tell. Daniel wished he could ask him what happened during those missing months, who came into the yard, who ignored his cries. Daniel knew he needed help, someone who could see what he was missing. That's when he called Mia, his younger sister. They hadn't talked much lately. Life had pulled them in different directions, but when she picked up, her voice filled with surprise and warmth. "You're home?" she asked. "I'm home," Daniel replied. "But something's wrong. I need you here." Within a day, Mia arrived. She brought energy with her. Questions, coffee, and her laptop. She worked in cybersecurity, nothing fancy, but she knew how to dig. When Daniel showed her the letters, her brows knit together. "This is targeted," she said quietly. "Not random. Someone knows when you're vulnerable." Mia stayed in the guest room and spent hours scanning through his email accounts, his home network, even the smart camera he'd never bothered setting up. The camera logs were strange. Gaps in the footage. Weeks where no activity had been recorded at all, even though Daniel had installed it months before he left for deployment. Someone had tampered with it. Wiped it clean. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing." But who? Daniel started thinking back to his final mission, the one Carter had mentioned. He couldn't remember details, but one name kept popping into his mind. Emerson. Captain John Emerson. A high-ranking officer who had always kept his distance from the unit, always operating just outside the usual channels. He was in charge of the op that year. If anyone knew what had really happened, it was him. Daniel tracked down Emerson's last known posting through an old contact. Retired now, living out west. That didn't surprise him. Men like Emerson didn't stick around once the heat got close. They vanished quietly. While Mia continued searching from home, Daniel decided to go find Emerson. He hated leaving Max behind, but Mia promised to stay with him. "You go," she said. "I'll protect him like he's mine." Daniel drove across 3 states to a quiet town tucked between mountains and pine trees. Emerson's house was easy to find. Big, guarded by tall hedges and 2 very unfriendly German shepherds. When Daniel knocked, it took a while for the door to open. Emerson looked older but still sharp. His eyes like glass cutting through fog. "Sergeant Reyes," he said flatly. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "I need answers," Daniel said. "And I think you owe me some." They sat outside on a stone patio, away from the house. Daniel didn't beat around the bush. He told him about Max, the letters, the threats. Emerson listened, but his face stayed blank. When Daniel finished, there was a long silence. "You were part of something you didn't even know existed," Emerson finally said. "The mission in 2018 wasn't just recon. It was a live test." "A test for what?" Emerson looked down. "Behavioral loyalty." They were studying how soldiers responded to indirect pressure, threats to home, to loved ones. Max was flagged in your file as a vulnerability. So was your sister. Daniel felt like the ground had tilted beneath him. "Are you saying this was some kind of experiment?" "I didn't know the details at the time," Emerson said quietly. "But I've learned more since I left." They called it Project Sentinel. It was buried deep, contracted out to private companies. They monitored you, tested how much pain they could cause before you'd crack. Daniel stood up, fists clenched. "They left my dog to starve. And now they're threatening my family." "You were never supposed to make it home in one piece," Emerson said. "But you did. And now they think you know too much." Daniel drove back faster than he should have. Every hour on the road, his mind played with possibilities. Had they found out Mia was here? Had they come back while he was gone? When he finally pulled up to the house, everything looked normal, but that only made his heart race faster. He rushed inside, calling for Mia. She appeared from the hallway, phone in hand, eyes wide. "You need to see this." She showed him her screen. An email with no sender, no subject, just a video. It was footage from inside their living room. The same angle as their old camera, but more recent. Someone had been inside, filming, watching. In the video, Max lay asleep, and Mia was reading on the couch, completely unaware. "This wasn't from our system," she said. "They're using their own." Daniel felt a chill go through him. They weren't just watching from afar. They were here, inside. He checked every door, every window. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. Just fear left behind like a fingerprint. As the sun set and the house slipped into shadow, Daniel stood at the back door with Max beside him. The sky turned a dark blue, and the cicadas filled the silence with their steady hum. "We're not safe here," he said quietly. Mia joined him, her face pale but determined. "Then let's make them come to us. Let's find out who they really are." And from the woods behind the house, unseen in the fading light, something or someone watched. The real fight hadn't even started yet. "Daniel." He answered on the first ring. "They came, didn't they?" "Yes," she said, voice shaky. "And I got him. Or at least enough to find out who he is." Back at the cabin, Daniel sat in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke. "It's time to finish this." The next day, Mia ran the footage through a facial recognition program. The match came back fast. Kenneth Voss, former military intelligence, now a security analyst for Argonne Systems. He wasn't just a hired hand. He was a handler, a man who orchestrated operations from behind the scenes. Daniel sent the footage to Carter, who agreed to meet him in person the next morning. But Daniel knew they wouldn't get another chance. Argonne wouldn't let this slide. Not now. That night rain poured hard. Thunder shook the windows. Daniel returned to the house, this time with Carter beside him. The three of them sat in the dark, waiting. Daniel felt it. Something was about to happen. Max lay at the door, ears perked, body tense. Just after midnight the power cut out. Everything went black. The backup battery kicked in, lighting the room with a soft red glow. But the house felt different now. Charged. Like the silence was being held together by a single thread. Carter moved to the front window. "They're coming." Daniel nodded. "Then let them." The outside was quiet, but something in the air shifted. The sound of leaves crunching, faint footfalls on wet grass. Max let out a low growl. A shadow moved past the window. And then a knock at the door, slow, deliberate. The house held its breath. No one moved. Then came the second knock. And a voice, deep, calm, and chilling. "Sergeant Reyes, you should have stayed gone." Daniel stepped forward, heart pounding, breath steady. He reached for the doorknob. And everything went still. Daniel's hand hovered on the doorknob, heart beating like a war drum in his chest. Behind him, Mia held her breath. Carter moved quietly to the side, drawing his weapon and signaling for Daniel to step back. But Daniel didn't move. That voice on the other side of the door, it was familiar. Not just from the threats, but from something deeper, something buried. The knock came again, slower this time. Haunting. "Open the door, Daniel. We don't want to hurt anyone." "Not unless we have to." Daniel glanced at Carter. That voice. "I know it." The front light flickered, then went dark again. Carter nodded once. "Let's see who wants to dance." In one swift motion, Daniel flung the door open. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, painting the figure on the porch in shadow. He stood tall, soaked, face partially hidden by the brim of his cap. But as the porch light flickered back to life, Daniel stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Lewis." The man smiled. Agent Thomas Lewis. The last man Daniel had trusted before his discharge. A government liaison during his final deployment. Someone Daniel thought had disappeared after the mission collapsed. You're supposed to be dead, Daniel said, voice low and sharp. Louis gave a small shrug. That's what they told you. Easier that way. Easier to erase a problem when it's buried. Carter stepped closer. You were in on Sentinel. Louis chuckled, stepping inside uninvited. No. I was Sentinel. The room tensed like a wire pulled tight. Max growled from the hallway, but stayed back at Daniel's command. You're the one who gave the orders. Daniel asked. You left Max to starve. You sent those letters. Louis turned slowly, eyes dark. Project Sentinel was never about hurting you, Daniel. It was about control. You were a loose end. You came home with memories you shouldn't have. And then, you started asking questions. Mia, watching from behind the stairs, whispered, Why now? Why not finish it back then? Louis's face hardened. Because you survived. Because you were stronger than we calculated. And now, thanks to her. He nodded toward Mia. You've exposed our weak points. Carter raised his weapon. Why are you really here? Louis didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and slowly pulled out a small black flash drive. This, he said, holding it up, is everything. The full list of personnel, funding sources, and mission files. But it's not a gift. It's a warning. He placed the drive on the entryway table. You have 24 hours to disappear. Take your sister, your dog, whatever you care about, and vanish. If you go quiet, this ends here. Daniel stared at him. And if I don't? Louis's smile returned, colder this time. Then the next knock on your door won't come with options. With that, Louis turned and walked out into the rain. No threats, no dramatics, just the sound of his boots fading into the night. The three stood in silence, listening. When the hum of the world returned, Carter finally spoke. He just handed us their entire playbook. Daniel stared at the flash drive. Or it's a trap. Mia moved quickly, plugging the drive into a secure, offline system she'd prepared earlier. She watched the files load, thousands of them. Surveillance footage, internal memos, payment records. Some redacted, some clear as day. And in the middle of it all, a single name stood out. Myraith. Daniel's eyes narrowed. That's Mom's name. He took a step forward. Opened the folder. Inside were documents marked classified. 17 Malawian kwaches, obsidian tier. And there, at the bottom, an old scanned photo. A woman in uniform, standing beside a much younger Thomas Louis. Mia's voice trembled. What is this? Daniel looked at the date. 1989. Before he was even born. Carter leaned in. Your mother was part of an earlier version of Sentinel. Long before they turned it into a psychological test. This wasn't just about you, Daniel. You were born into it. The words hit him like a punch. His entire life. His enlistment, his missions, the assignment that nearly killed him. It wasn't random. It was calculated. Designed. He hadn't stumbled into danger. He'd been built for it. Mia turned away from the screen, pale. That's why they were watching us. It wasn't just about Max. Or the mission. It was about legacy. Carter shook his head. And Louis showing up now. He's not warning you. He's covering his tracks. That drive. Bait. They know you won't run. They want you to go public. So they can take you out in the open. Daniel's fists clenched. Then we bring it to them first. But before they could move, Max barked sharply from the hallway. His ears perked toward the window. Daniel ran to check, his stomach dropped. Across the street, 2 black SUVs had pulled up silently. No headlights, no engine sounds. Just there, like shadows emerging from fog. Daniel turned to Carter. They're not waiting. Carter nodded grimly. Then neither are we. In the chaos of the moment, no one noticed the second flash drive Louis had slipped into the mailbox outside. Inside it wasn't just files. It was a direct link to a satellite channel, active, live streaming, and already broadcasting their every move. And on the other end, someone was watching. Someone who hadn't shown their face yet. Someone even Lewis was afraid of. The SUVs sat like silent threats under the street lamp, unmoving but undeniable. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He shut the blinds quickly, signaling Mia and Carter to get into position. Max stayed close, his body tense. His eyes locked on the front door. Outside, the air was thick with tension, like the whole world had paused to see what Daniel would do next. Carter moved to the back of the house, peeking through the blinds. 2 on foot circling left. They're not rushing, they want us to make the first move. Daniel took a deep breath, then turned to Mia. You still have the backup system online. She nodded. I'm ready. Good. The second they break in, activate the broadcast. She looked up. You're going to show them everything. Daniel gave a tight nod. If they want the story buried, we make it public. He grabbed the flash drive Lewis left and slipped it into a small portable device, one that Mia had prepared to go live on encrypted channels. Carter checked his weapon and moved to cover the hallway. Max took his place at Daniel's side, just like in the field, loyal and fearless. Knock came. Not at the front door this time but at the back. Then another knock, this time at the window. They were surrounding the house. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, his heart pounding. Start the upload, he said. Mia hit the command. The files Lewis gave them, along with the new ones they'd pulled from the second drive, began streaming across servers worldwide, spreading across dark web forums, encrypted message boards and whistleblower channels. The truth, all of it, out in the open. At the same moment, the first figure stepped through the back door. Silent, weapon raised. Carter didn't hesitate. He shouted a warning. You step any closer, and the whole world's already watching you. The man paused. For a second everything stopped. Then Max growled. Threatening. The intruder took another step. And that's when the power to the entire block cut out. Lights gone. Silence. A voice crackled through a hidden speaker in the room. Distorted, cold. You think this ends with a file dump? You have no idea what we've built. Sentinel wasn't just a project. It's a doctrine. You're just one story in a much larger book. Daniel stood tall. Then maybe it's time someone tore the pages out. Suddenly, a floodlight kicked on from a drone overhead, blasting through the dark. It illuminated the yard, the intruders frozen like ghosts caught mid-motion. The live feed, still streaming, caught every face, every weapon, every detail. The world now had eyes on them. And then, one of the masked men pulled off his helmet. Daniel's breath caught. It was Lewis. But this Lewis looked older, weaker, confused. Carter stared. What the hell? The man spoke, his voice shaky. They cloned us. They didn't just end the program, they evolved it. I escaped 3 years ago. I've been trying to warn you. The one who gave you the drive. That wasn't me. Daniel staggered back. Mia gasped, whispering. Then who was it? Just then the wall monitor, hooked to Mia's network, flickered on. A single video feed played. A laboratory. Bright white walls. And in the center a tank filled with some kind of fluid. Inside it floated a man. An exact copy of Daniel. Everyone froze. The real Daniel felt his knees weaken. What is this? The older Lewis, still standing in the yard with his hands raised, looked up through the floodlight. They were never after you. They were building you. Testing your limits. Watching how far you'd go. The dog, the letters, the missions. It was all part of it. Max let out a low whine, sensing Daniel's rising fear. Carter moved closer. They needed the perfect soldier. Someone the world would believe. Someone who could disappear and no one would question it. Mia stared at the screen, horrified. They don't just control people. They replace them. Suddenly the screen glitched. A final message appeared, blinking in red. Subject 27A. Failed containment. Eliminate and reboot protocol. The room went cold. Carter's voice broke the silence. You were subject 27A. Daniel swallowed hard. And they want to erase me now. But it was too late. The footage had already gone global. Journalists, former agents, and citizens were sharing the files everywhere. The truth couldn't be buried anymore. Daniel looked at his friends. Then I guess I'm not a soldier anymore. Mia stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. No. You're something they didn't expect. Daniel gave a faint smile. Max barked once like he understood. Outside, the SUVs peeled away, the agents retreating. The program exposed. The house still standing. But somewhere deep in the shadows, a figure watched from another feed. In a quiet room filled with screens and silent observers, a voice spoke into the darkness. Activate the next sequence. Let's see how Subject 28 performs. And the screen faded to black. The following morning, the rain had stopped, leaving a soft mist hovering over the neighborhood. The once silent street now buzzed with hushed voices and flashing lights. News vans lined the block, journalists huddled with cameras rolling, capturing what had quickly become a national sensation. The footage Mia had streamed had spread like wildfire, exposing the secrets of Project Sentinel, the covert manipulation of soldiers, and the twisted experiments that had shaped Daniel's life. Inside the house, Daniel sat quietly on the couch, Max resting beside him, head on his lap. The dog hadn't left his side all night. Even in the chaos, Max had stayed calm, loyal, like he knew Daniel needed him more than ever. Daniel gently stroked his fur, watching the media through a gap in the curtains. It was strange. All his life he'd worked in the shadows, trained to disappear. Now the world knew his face. Mia sat across from him, her laptop open but untouched. The files were out. The truth was no longer theirs to carry alone. They're calling you a hero, she said softly. Daniel gave a small smile. Feels more like a mistake that got lucky. Carter entered from the kitchen with 3 mugs of coffee, setting them down carefully. He looked tired but steady. Interpol called, Carter said. They're opening a global investigation into Sentinel. The higher-ups are panicking. Few have already vanished. Others are being questioned. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And Lewis? Carter hesitated. Gone. The older one. Disappeared sometime after the agents pulled out. I think he wanted it that way. He did his part. Now he's free. Daniel leaned back against the couch, his eyes drifting to the ceiling. All these years I thought coming home would mean peace. Normal life. A chance to finally breathe, he said. But it was just the start. Mia nodded slowly. But at least now. It's your story again. For a long time none of them spoke. The house was still, almost peaceful. Outside, reporters asked questions they'd never be able to fully answer. Inside, a broken soldier, a loyal sister, a dedicated agent, and a dog who refused to give up were quietly healing. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Just Daniel's name written in neat, careful handwriting. Mia opened it carefully and slid the single piece of paper into his hands. Daniel unfolded it. You were never meant to survive. But you did. And that's exactly why they'll never be able to control you again. Keep walking. Keep remembering. The next steps are yours. It wasn't signed. But Daniel knew who it was from. Not Lewis. Someone deeper in the shadows. Someone still watching. He folded the letter and tucked it away. That night, Daniel stood in the backyard with Max. The stars were finally visible, blinking like tiny lanterns scattered across the dark. Max sniffed the air, then looked up at him, tail wagging slightly. Daniel crouched beside him. You waited for me. All that time, he said softly. You didn't give up. Not once. Max licked his hand like he understood every word. I won't give up either, Daniel whispered. The news outlets would keep talking. The authorities would chase leads, and more secrets would surely come out. But Daniel knew the real victory was smaller, quieter. It was in the moment he chose to stand up, to tell the truth, even when the cost was everything. It was in his decision to stop running from what had been done to him, and instead stand for those who hadn't found their voice yet. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Whistleblowers came forward. Other veterans, once silent, began telling their stories. Not all had been part of Sentinel, but all had been touched by systems meant to use them and forget them. Daniel worked quietly behind the scenes, helping wherever he could. Not as a soldier, not even as a hero, just as someone who understood. Mia started a foundation with Carter's help, one focused on helping former service members navigate life after deployment. They offered legal support, therapy, and, most importantly, a place to feel seen. It was slow work, but it mattered. And every now and then, when the world quieted down, they'd receive handwritten letters from people thanking them for exposing the truth. Daniel never asked for recognition. But when Max was honored at a local veterans event with a medal and a special commendation for loyalty and service, Daniel finally let himself smile, fully and without weight. "He deserves it more than anyone," he told the crowd that day. "He reminded me what it means to keep going, even when everything feels lost." As months passed, the name Sentinel became more than a scandal. It became a lesson about loyalty, misuse of power, and the importance of accountability. Daniel's story, Mia's courage, Max's patience, they resonated with people far beyond what they could have imagined. Still, there were nights when Daniel woke up in a cold sweat. Ghosts didn't disappear overnight. But each time Max would be there, curling beside him. And that, more than anything, reminded him he was home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel stood at the edge of the yard. The breeze was gentle, carrying the sound of distant laughter from a neighbor's barbecue. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes when you've made it through the fire and come out the other side with your soul intact. Mia came outside and stood beside him. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally am." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Max barked once, chasing a leaf across the yard. And somewhere deep inside Daniel's heart, the final weight lifted. They had tried to break him, but they didn't realize. You can't break someone who's already found what matters most. Family, truth, and a dog who never gave up. And with that, Daniel turned toward the house, Max bounding happily beside him, ready to face whatever came next. Together,